Hello, and welcome to Topic 9, Chapter 6. And in this chapter, we're going to be learning about public opinion. All right, so this week we actually start the last unit of the semester. So we are 2/3 of the way through this semester. And so, as you remember, in Unit 1, we learned about the foundations of American government. In Unit 2, which we just got out of, we learned about the institutions of American government. And now we're finally moving on to learn about politics. So this is the unit on politics, which is really an exciting unit. I mean, I think they're all exciting, but this is an exciting unit because it really shows the lifeblood of what moves the American government. Okay, and so we learned earlier in the semester that politics is defined as the conflict and struggle over the leadership, structure, and policies of government. Okay. So, in other words, politics is really about struggling for power, influencing people who get elected, running for office, joining interest groups in order to influence outcomes, okay? And influence who leads us and who implements public policy. And so, in this unit, we start with public opinion. And you might be thinking, well, why public opinion? Why is that the first thing we learn about in politics? In the unit on politics. And the reason that is because, so much of our political action comes from what we believe, comes from our ideology, and comes from our political beliefs, and is a product of how we're socialized. And then we like to spend a lot of time measuring public opinion is too. So this is a long chapter. There's a lot in it, and that's what that chapter is going to be covering. We're also going to be focusing next on the news media. The news media is also another really big shaper of what people know in the United States, right? So not only does the news media, inform you, but the news media also gets you to think critically and analytically about news stories. I feel like we didn't do as much on the media in civil liberties, but that's because we kind of wait for that for this chapter. And so when we get to the media next week, I think you'll really enjoy that. And then we'll be learning about voting and participation, and then campaigns and elections. So that's what we've got on the rest of the docket for the rest of the semester. So let's go ahead and get started with today's lecture. So topic 9 has 2 lectures. In this lecture, we're going to define what public opinion is, and then we're going to describe the role that values play in shaping public opinion. In the next lecture, we're going to learn about the process of political socialization and the agents of socialization. And they'll have an extra credit opportunity this week to take what you've learned about socialization and put it into action. So keep your eyes out for that on the Canvas site. We do have a discussion this week that's dedicated to learning about ideology. You'll watch a brief video about the difference between liberalism and conservatism, and then you'll take what you learned and apply it to analyzing an essay and trying to determine whether or not the author is liberal or conservative. And then there's a lot of material in the textbook about public opinion polls, okay, and how public opinion is measured. I'll let it to you to read about that and how public surveys are conducted. It's very interesting, but and also important. So make sure you take a look at it. All right, that's what we've got on the docket. Let's go ahead and get started. So what is public opinion? Well, public opinion is a lot like what it sounds. It is the opinion of the public, okay? It is the sense of this is what the people believe widely, okay? But that in and of itself is probably not a good enough definition. So let's look at what the textbook, how the textbook defines public opinion. For the textbook, public opinion is the attitudes that people have about issues, events, and personalities. And so it's basically the perspective that you have about a particular event or a personality. And that those attitudes are specific preferences on an issue, okay? That's what your attitude is, okay? So let's take a real hot topic issue these days. Let's say a hot topic issue is abortion rights, right? Whether or not you have a constitutional right to an abortion, or whether or not abortion should be widely available. Well, the attitude, the preference that you have on abortion, that's your public opinion on abortion, okay? Take, for example, an event like what's going on with Israel attacking Gaza after Gaza, viciously and brutally attacked Israel. Well, there's a huge war going on there, and hundreds of thousands or thousands of people are dying. And so you might look at that event and say, you know what? I feel really bad for the Gazans, but they kind of deserve what they get because they live amongst terrorists. And others might say, no, my attitude or my preference on that is that it's not fair. What Israel is doing is a huge humanitarian, creating a huge humanitarian crisis and not thinking about civilian life. You could have attitudes about personalities, right? You could have attitudes about the political personalities. You could have attitudes about sports personalities, such as a certain Brewers manager who is now going to work for the Cubs. I won't say what my attitude or specific reference is on that, but I'll just say I'm angry. But all of those things kind of fall in the category of what would be public opinion. Now, here's some questions that you can ask yourself. What is your attitude towards this issue? Okay. And I'm going to use these, to sort of build off of so that we can see what the relationship between our attitudes are and our values are. Okay. So this is an older question, but it's still relevant because COVID's still around in the United States, as is many other diseases that need vaccines. And so the question is should the government mandate that all healthcare workers be vaccinated against COVID? Okay. What's your attitude on that? What's your specific preference in terms of mandating vaccines or not? Now here, do you support the use of affirmative action in college admissions? Again, I kept this in here because it's going to help us think about values in a second. Okay. But even though the Supreme Court said that you can no longer use, it's no longer constitutional to use affirmative action in college admissions, that doesn't mean that your attitude about it could not be supportive of it, right? You could say, no, I do support the use of affirmative action in college admissions. And what the Supreme Court did was wrong. Or you could say, no, I absolutely agree that what the Supreme Court did was right. That would be your opinion. And then obviously we just, had the debate on the Electoral College. And so the question is, hey, what's your attitude? Do you want to get rid or keep the Electoral College? So all of those, and the way you answer those, give us your attitude. They give you your specific preference, and that it fits into this broader realm, which is known as public opinion. All right, so attitudes or opinion, they are not formed in a vacuum, okay? They're a product of something. Your attitudes and preferences are a product of something. They're a product for everybody, okay? So in other words, you're not born, supporting vaccine mandates. You're not born being pro-life or pro-choice, right? Those attitudes are a reflection of what your values are and what your principles are, okay? And so what we see is that when it comes to attitudes and opinion and preferences, it's really values that do that shaping of people's attitudes and opinions. And where we get those values come from different places. In the next lecture, we're going to be taking a look at the role that socialization plays, right? And so we get values from our family, from our parents, from our teachers, from our life experiences, for the amount of education that we have. All of those are values that we get that shape our attitude and opinions. More globally, and so, what values are, basically these basic principles that, shape your opinions. And so we can see that we get them at a personal level, but we also get values in a more global level, in a more sort of cultural or societal level. And so as we know from earlier in the semester, we talked about this thing called the American political culture, right? And that American political culture is sort of bound together what it means to be an American, right? Bound together certain specific core values, okay? And most Americans share and support these basic values, such as liberty, democracy, and equality, okay? You're not going to find a lot of Americans who are going to say, nope, don't like liberty, nope, don't like democracy, although these days, who knows? This day, nope, don't like equality, right? At least we pay lip service, to those values. And I think, honestly, we pay more than lip service to those. I'm just kind of being a jerk right here. And so, that we do have these values that sort of shape us as to what it means to be an American. And those aren't the only ones, right? hardworkingness, a sense of independence, a sense of autonomy, right? There are other values, compassion. There are other values that I think we take pride in terms of what it means to be an American. Okay. But all of these are examples of these core values that really do have an impact on our public opinion and our attitudes and preferences. So, thinking back to the public opinion questions that I had on the other slide, it's likely that when you saw those questions and you were thinking about how you would answer them, the way you would answer them, your attitude about those questions reflects your political values, your values in general. It's also likely that if somebody else was in this class and they were also looking at those questions and they were answering them, that they would also base their opinion on values. And it could be that you guys are basing your opinion on the same core value. But it could be that that other person in the class holds the opposite opinion as you do on the issue, even though you are both motivated by the same value. What? How is that possible, Professor Hankinson? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at some concrete examples for clarification. So we can see where values can be common or similar between people, but opinions can be very different. So let's take a look at some examples. All right, so on each of these slides, you're going to see one of the issues that we discussed earlier. We're starting with vaccine mandates, and they're all going to be coupled with one of the three values from the political culture. In this case, it's liberty is the value, and the issue is vaccine mandates. And so let's take a look at how somebody might respond to the question about whether vaccines should be mandated for healthcare workers. Well, one person, a common response might be, I don't support vaccine mandates for all healthcare workers because it's the individual who should make the decision. It's the individual healthcare worker, not the government. On the flip side of that, another common opinion is, look, I do support vaccine mandates for healthcare workers because a person should be free to receive healthcare in a safe and relatively disease-free environment, okay? And how do you ensure that? You ensure that by making sure that the healthcare workers have vaccines, okay? Now, no opinion is correct. It's just two different opinions that are on the topic, but they both seem to be predicated upon the value of liberty. And so you could see that in the top one, there's this freedom for the individual. The individual should decide, not the government. And in the other, it is also a freedom too. Like, I want to be free to not get sick, okay? That's my liberty, okay? And that the government should, do something to ensure that people can be free as they are seeking healthcare. And so I think what you're going to see is that liberty here is defined differently. On the top, it says, it's more of a traditional take on liberty, that government should not interfere with an individual's freedom, this idea that government is constrained from restricting individual rights, okay? But on the flip side of that, you have sort of this, that government has an obligation to interfere with individual freedom if the exercise of the liberty harms the freedom of others, okay? And so you should have the ability to freely exercise your rights. And if you can't exercise your right to go and get health care in a safe environment, then the government needs to then curtail those who are harming those who can't get this safe. And in that case, those who did not get the vaccine, those healthcare workers, okay? So I just want to show that to you because you can see that you can have different opinions, but they can be predicated upon the same value. Let's look at the next one. For this side, the value is equality, and the issue, as it was on the other slide, is affirmative action, okay? Now, as we know, affirmative action was and its use in colleges was deemed unconstitutional at the end of or in the summer of 2023. But that doesn't mean people still don't have opinions about affirmative action. And these are two opinions that are quite common. One is, I don't support use of affirmative action in college admissions because students should be equally evaluated on academic performance alone, not race. Race is not relevant to whether someone will succeed in college, okay? So against affirmative action, that is the attitude. Another attitude is the support of affirmative action. In this case, this person says, I do support the use of affirmative action because evaluating on academic record alone fails to recognize the inherent racial inequalities in our K through 12 system. And so from this perspective, since the K through 12 system is not equal across the board, depending on where you live, you might get a better schooling than if you lived in another place. That there needs to be maybe some leveling of the field to take into consideration both economic and racial inequalities. Okay, so neither of those opinions is right, but it just shows you that there's two different opinions, but they are based on the value of equality. And so again, just with liberty, we see that equality is defined differently here. And there are different ways of defining equality as a value. And how we define them oftentimes can lead to divisions. So one way is saying that equality is being treated the same as others, right? And that's what's in the first opinion, right? That every college student should be treated the same. We should look at their academic standards. We should look at their test scores. We should look at their grades, maybe look at their extracurriculars, right? And then you compare people equally. But from the other perspective, that equality is a different way. There's a different way of looking at equality. In this case, there are times when treating people differently actually increases equality, okay? And so that if you are the product of a failing school system, and that's the school you had to go to, and that's the school you had to try to succeed at, you actually might do a really good job at succeeding given those circumstances, but it may never be good enough to get into some of the more selective schools, right? And so if you actually want to make things equal, I guess one thing you could do could be improve schools. But if you're not going to do that, then at least take that into consideration when you're letting people into college, okay? Because that, from that perspective, it actually brings us closer to equality because it's recognizing inequalities within our society and trying to remedy them. So again, equality, the same, very different ways of defining it, and the results are two different opinions. And the last value is democracy, and the issue is the Electoral College. This should be pretty familiar with you since you just did your discussion. So some people support getting rid of the Electoral College because democracy should be based on majority rule, especially when it comes to electing the president. The other viewpoint is I think we should keep the Electoral College because while democracy is majority rules, democracy should also make sure that the concerns of those not in the majority should be considered when electing the president, okay? So, two different ways of defining democracy, and we're well aware of that at this point in this semester. So, democracy can definitely be defined as majority rules, whoever gets 50% plus one. But democracy can also be defined as majority rule with consideration of the interests of those in the minority. So people who want to keep the EC and get rid of the EC, they could both be doing it for democratic reasons, small d. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful for you so that you can sort of see, one, the way that values shape our attitudes, but also that we live in a really polarized world, and it's really difficult to talk politics with some people without getting into a fight. And so I think knowing that shared values can actually bring about different opinions can help bridge the gap. It can close a little bit of the polarization. It can bridge the differences. And so this is a dorky example, but I give dorky examples. One of the things you might consider over Thanksgiving and Christmas is that, foster civic and civil discussion on a heated issue. It really does help to identify the shared values that you have in common, right? So for example, taking the mandate thing, if you're having a disagreement about it's the individual's right, no, it's the right of the person to be safe and secure, you could just simply, maybe you're never going to agree on the vaccine mandate or some other hot topic. But what you can say is, well, when it comes to vaccine mandates, we both care a lot about personal freedom, but we differ on the role that government should play in realizing the freedom. Then you can pick up a beer and click it and go, to liberty, right? And at least you can find some unity in that. All right, so this brings us to our next lecture, which is about political socialization. I want to make sure that we make the link between political values and political socialization. We talked about how political values are not innate, you're not born with them, but they are learned, okay? And they are learned through this process called political socialization. We're socialized in many ways. We're socialized religiously, we're socialized economically. I teach gender studies, so we're way socialized from a gender perspective, and we're definitely socialized when it comes to politics. And political socialization is a particular kind of socialization, and it's the induction of individuals into the political culture, okay? And not just our political culture, but it's learning the underlying beliefs and values on which any political system is based. And so that political socialization is how you learn to be an American or Iranian or French or Nigerian or ... Okay? So, political values come from political socialization. Well, where does political socialization come from? Well, political socialization takes through these things called the agents of socialization, okay? And that is the institutions and groups that help shape an individual's basic political values and beliefs. So that's what we've got on the docket for the next lecture. Thanks for listening and paying attention. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again soon.